Hey, hello, and welcome everybody. Good morning. Welcome to our fifth podcast here at the Nurture Wealth Podcast. We are back again today to answer another really interesting question we have for you today. Back again, my friend Naseema. Naseema, you want to say hello?
Hey, hey, everybody, welcome back.
Hey, so we had a question submitted. It's an anonymous question, but I think it's a really good question, and so we want to have some dialogue around this. I think a lot of nurse clients that we speak to are still dealing with things like student loans, and they're looking at these big numbers, 10, 20, 30, 50, maybe even more, $100,000. And a big question sometimes is, should I take on an extra job? Or in this case, should I travel nurse to make more money and pay down debt? So we're going to have a little conversation around that today and help you think through this situation because I know sometimes the stress of working, you're probably working 50, 60 hours as it is, thinking about adding another job, leaving your family can be kind of a lot. Naseema, how would you answer this question? If this was you in this situation, you're sitting there 50,000 in debt, and we should lay out that this particular person is making $80,000 living in
hmm
Connecticut. So it's not super low cost of living there, but it's not super high.
hmm
So what are your
Right.
thoughts on that?
Well, another thing to highlight is this person is a single mom, and so they have kids and that they're responsible for solely. And without knowing what the support network is in place, this is how I'm going to answer the question. So the way that I look at tackling student loans is how much you actually owe to your income. And usually, if it's less than a 1-to-1 ratio, so she's making $80,000, her student loans are $50,000, I would say to always make sure that I would say that this is something that you can tackle right now with your income. You can knock out those student loans rapidly and aggressively. If it's higher than a 1-to-1 ratio, then I would look at different student loan repayment programs, refinance, and other advanced strategies. But if it's less than a 1-to-1 ratio, I would always say this is something that you can aggressively knock out where you are. And so to answer the basic question of should I travel, and when we answer these questions, we're answering off of the information that we're giving. Unfortunately, if the person isn't live here with us, we can't ask clarifying questions. But from the information given, yeah, I feel like with her income, she can aggressively pay off her debt. And the way that I aggressively paid off my debt, as a refresher, is by using public student loan forgiveness. I mean, not sorry, using zero-based budgeting and just the debt snowball. And I have a lot of information on my page about that, and that's just something that you can Google. But yeah, I would just recommend that she knocks out her debt where she is.
Okay, so you mentioned two things there. We haven't really laid a foundation on all these kind of basic financial skills yet. Maybe we could take a step back before I kind of give my thoughts on that. Can you talk about what zero-based budgeting is, and then also what the debt snowball is?
So zero-based budgeting is a form of budgeting where every one of your dollars is given an assignment in advance. Sorry, Jason, I can't see you. You moved your computer up and I can't see your face.
Oh, well, I'm still here.
Sorry.
Don't worry. It was in
Oh,
the
okay.
way. So
Okay.
yeah, let me see.
It's just this one. Oh, okay.
A little
Sorry.
better. Okay.
It's just this camera.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got multiple cameras going on here, but yeah.
He's fancy. So zero-based budgeting is where you give every one of your dollars an assignment in advance. So telling like if you make $10,000, you allocate every one of those dollars an assignment. So whether it's paying down your debt, down to paying for clothes for your kids, everything every month looks different and every dollar has an assignment. And so with that, I always prioritize whatever my debt payoff goal was. If I knew that I had to pay off my debt by a certain time, I say, hey, $2,000 needs to go towards this debt no matter what. And I adjust everything else around that. So that's zero-based budgeting. Doesn't mean that you have $0 in your account. It just means that you're giving all your money in assignment. And then the debt snowball is where you list your debts from smallest to largest. You focus on paying off the smallest debt, and you pay the minimum balances, the minimum payment on everything else. And so you list out all your student loans. In this case, you would list out, you usually have multiple student loans within your student loan servicer site. And so you list those all out, and then you focus on the smallest balance debt. You throw every single one of your dollars towards that. And then once you pay that off, now you have that minimum payment that you no longer had to make. And then so that frees up even more money to throw at your next debt. And so it snowballs so that every month, every subsequent month, or after you pay off a debt, you have more and more money to throw at your next debt.
Good. I think that's helpful for people. And, even coming from like, a certified financial planner perspective, even though financially paying the highest interest rate, technically pay off things faster, I actually recommend the debt snowball where people pay the lowest balance first because when you're dealing with folks that have debts, we're not usually dealing with, pure rational type of thoughts. Usually there's some behavioral issues
Mhm.
there. So when I'm dealing with behavioral issues, then I'm going to take a behavioral approach. I actually 100% agree with that. And I do think, that zero-based budgeting is great where, when you sit down and everything is mapped out, so you know exactly what you're putting to your debt payment plan, and then you just drop that payment right away. Because if not, I swear to God
Mhm.
that somehow that money will just find a way to get spent on something else. So
Yeah.
I think if you are, facing some debt, then that's definitely I agree with that 100%. Even though financially interest rate higher will be first, but I've seen a lot more success with people following the smallest amount of debt, regardless of interest rate, and then just paying that off, and then stacking up next one and next one from there. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
so here's my thought. So I have this little calculator here. I think is pretty cool. That it's basically a salary tax calculator, and I think it's pretty good. It may not be perfect, but what I was able to do is put in $80,000 for our question here, and then it takes out the taxes in Connecticut, and it tells us what we'd be getting net. Okay, so $80,000 gross. That's going to be 66.66 and 67 cents. So net pay per month would be about 46.60. Okay, so we got 46.60 per month after taxes to be looking at paying these things off. There was also a note in there where the mortgage was about $120,000. So I'm going to assume the house payment's somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 because that's pretty reasonable, somewhere in that range. So let's say $1,500. So if we have $1,500, that's going to be to the house payment. We're left with about $3,000, $3,100 right there. And out of 3,100, we have to take care of ourselves and a kid. So at $50,000, the debt payments, my guess, somewhere between 500 to 800 a month, somewhere in that range, unless they're on a income-based program. But so probably the minimum payment is somewhere, again, let's call it 1,800. So we have 1,500 plus 800, so we have 2,300, and now it's about 50% of our money is going to those two payments, and we have about 50% of our money now that can get used for other things. Okay, I think a very reasonable, again, depending how many people are in the home. Did it mention one kid? Was that the message there?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say a single mom and one child, $150 a week for food. I think that's pretty reasonable. That's about what I spend, and I have me and my wife, so we spend that. And if you have
Sorry, three kids. Three kids.
oh 3 kids, okay,
Hmm.
okay, so let's call it 200 a week. Okay, 200 a week because I still
Okay.
think that's pretty reasonable for that. So okay, so we go from 2,300 minus 800 there. Let's put another. So now we're down to $1,500 of free cash flow for everything else. And so let's call it $500 on the rest of our bills, gas, those type of things. So I think that leaves us with about $1,000 left over to put towards this debt. Okay. So the
Hmm.
question is, should you travel to get this paid off? And based on this scenario, there's probably about $1,000 there, unless there's some loose spending that you're not following a zero-based system. So I really think you
Hmm.
should have about at least $1,000, and I'm probably being conservative. You could probably have a little bit more because I think 800 is kind of a lot, even for three
Yeah.
kids. To be honest,
Yeah.
but again, just being
Yeah.
flexible, understanding we have to, sometimes we eat out and things like that. So we have $1,000 a month that we can put towards this. So if we're paying our initial 800 and we could take another $1,000 towards that, I'm sure we're going to have some interest on that. But at $50,000, you should probably have that paid off in less than a year, right?
Yeah.
So when you really break down the numbers, we're looking probably somewhere between 9 months to a year to get this taken care of. Okay, so you brought up a really good point is if you have 3 kids and you're going to travel, well, okay, so what's going to happen with the kids? You're going to have to obviously get them taken care of. Maybe you have grandma or, sister or somebody that can help take care of those kids. But if you have to pay for a sitter to watch those kids, then you really got to look at what's the cost and benefit of doing all this because you're going to have travel costs, right? So you're going to have gas, food on the road. time away from family, possibly paying for babysitters and things like that. Depending on how much you make, right? So what would you say an average travel nurse would make in that part of the country if you have any idea?
In Connecticut, well, see, I'm not sure about Connecticut. Usually the rates are similar. I think $80,000 for a salary is pretty good. And travel nursing, so let me speak to the Bay Area. So when people come to the Bay Area to do travel nursing, the salaries are much lower than a staff salary, but they do have housing costs taken care of, and they have non-taxable expenses that they can kind of write off. And so it kind of makes it equivalent to what, say, my salary would be in the Bay Area. And so, and this is where a lot of people like to travel. So this is what I'm assuming this person is trying to do. Um, but ultimately, the salary isn't going to be too much different. And, the cost of living out here is way, way higher. So even if their housing expenses, their housing costs are taken care of, it's still going to be a significant chunk of like money. So they're not really going to be making too much more than what they're making in Connecticut.
Okay, so 80,000 a year, it's $40 an hour, basically, is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Year,
Hmm.
2 weeks vacation. So at $40 an hour, and then travel nurses, do they work generally like an 8-hour shift, or is that more like the overtime shifts, like you work in hospitals a lot of times?
They work 12s. Usually they
12.
come in and work 12-hour shifts. Yeah.
Okay, so then you get time and a half on that. So,
No, it's straight up. It's a straight 12.
so you don't get any overtime on that
If
front.
you're 12, if you work 12 hours, no, they don't get overtime for those shifts.
Okay, so that's $480, right? You're gonna get gross
Hmm.
before taxes.
Yeah. Hmm.
And if you're a single mom, yes, you have some kids, but you're probably going to be in the 22% bracket, somewhere in that range, federal
Hmm.
plus whatever state's taken out. So a neighborhood of 30% is going to be gone after you take, things like Social Security and Medicare tax out of there, 30 to 30 plus. So if you're going to make 480 gross, and you're going to take home only, 70% of that, or so maybe less if you're contributing to, a retirement vehicle of some sort. So we're looking at, let's see, about three 330 or so, something like that, take home. So this is where you really have to ask yourself, like, is it really worth $300 to travel, deal with getting the kids somewhere, following up on that, having to deal with kids that might be having some issues, if they're not at home, they're not on their schedule,
Yeah.
they're not eating the foods they normally eat, doing things in the way you normally do them. I really lean more towards, can you find ways to tighten up your budget? Or at the end of the day, a lot of times there's opportunities for overtime in primary jobs.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yes.
if you can get overtime in a primary job and you can get that $60 an hour, then you only need about 6 to 7 hours to make up, what you would need on that extra day. So if you can work an extra hour a day, or maybe a day with 2 extra hours, so it's only 2, 3 days a week you doing that. I lean more towards going that way if you really want to get
Yeah.
passionate and get this paid off. But keep in mind that if you're really not looking at what you're currently spending, that's probably a big miss on why you are not paying things off as fast as you'd like. Because if you're paying
Yes.
600 to 800 a month, on your basic payment, plus you have an extra $1,000 of cash flow to use towards other things, and maybe even if it's half of that, but that's still, it's $1,000 a month. It shouldn't take you more than a year to get this paid off. So, with the life disruption, dealing with 3 kids, having all the drama that goes in between that, I think I'm with you, and I think I'd rather see this person find a way to get some overtime locally and get tightened up on that cash flow, or also known as a budget. Those are my thoughts, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Concur. Thank you for breaking down those numbers because I think that that's super helpful.
Yeah, I think,
Mm.
getting to the actual number sometimes, and this happens with people of all levels, right? Most people have no idea what their numbers are, and so when they're
Yeah.
looking at challenges, or whether it's funding retirement or funding long-term goals like buying a car, buying a house, or short-term goals like getting out of debt, a lot of times people just have never sat down and look at the numbers and say, okay, well, if I give up a day a week, right? So if this particular person was going to earn an additional $300 traveling for a day per week, right? So it's an extra $1,000 a month. She's probably going to pay, so if she add $12,000 a year, she'll pay her debt off in what, an additional 3 or 4 months early, maybe. So 3 or 4 months early, it seems like a lot of time, but it's like, if you think back, January is almost over. If you think back into October until now, is it really that much time? It's really not a lot of time in the scheme of things. and the headache, drama, and possibly whatever your children do to these other people, because I know some kids are a little bit more high energy than others. Whatever suffering you put these people through every single week, I don't know. I would weigh more towards focusing on cleaning up whatever you're currently working with, and then seeing if you can pick up a couple extra hours, because I feel like you can end up in the same place by just staying focused and actually working through the numbers we talked about today in more detail.
Right.
That's my thought. So I don't know. I mean, that's I think where I'm at on it. Did we get any other questions this week?
No, that's the question, the one question that we got. So, yeah, I think just to piggyback on your talk, when you said to work extra hours, actually locally you can actually pick up a per diem job too, which you don't need the benefits, and so the pay is actually higher. And so I think that would even be a viable option if you're looking at ways to bring in extra income besides traveling. But like I said, I think that the focus needs to start at where you are and making sure that you're maximizing every one of your dollars that you take home.
Same for me. I agree with that. And then try to pick up some overtime locally here instead of dealing with all the drama of traveling. So
Yep.
if any nurses out there have a question, we would love to answer your questions. Naseema, do you want to give them the page that you want them to submit the question to?
Yes. So submit your questions to nursesonfirepodcast.com/ask. So that's the website. So the nursesonfirepodcast.com/ask is where you can go in and submit your questions. You can remain anonymous if you like. Try to provide as much details as you want us to know to answer your questions, but we love to answer your questions live here on our Monday episode, and then they'll re-air on the podcast as well, and those episodes drop every Monday.
Excellent. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you saw a little bit of value in this. And if you have any questions, Naseema, there's a website floating above your head. So when people see that, you go there, pop your question in, and we'll be happy to answer for you guys. Every Monday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time, and of course, it'll be here for you either on Facebook or on the podcast if you'd like to watch it later. All right. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye now.